They are still one of the great mysteries of the Vietnam War, the MIAs, prisoners of war designated missing in action. With the end of the Cold War, many have tried to bury this part of history and forget about the several thousand Americans and 6 Australians who are still missing in action. But tonight, you'll see how American POWs were delivered into the hands of Russia's infamous KGB. Later, some were simply exterminated. We went on the trail of these MIAs and ended up inside the headquarters of the KGB in Moscow. It's a story that involved investigations on 3 continents by American and Soviet journalists and 60 Minutes. When the bombs were falling, everyone knew the Americans had come to Vietnam. But the Russian role was kept secret. It turns out they were in there too, on the ground and in the air, trying to get hold of American flyers, trying to get vital American intelligence. How many captured Americans did you transport in your aircraft?
I personally have transported 2, but I have seen 3 captured Americans.
Pavel Ponomaryov may be the first Russian to speak up about their real war in Vietnam. His flight log shows he flew over 120 missions there as a navigator.
This one is the Prince.
His plane carried North Vietnamese troops, bombs, and those captured Americans.
We didn't have any specific uniform or any markings. We even talked to one another like civilians, using names without rank. That's how it was.
For 30 years, the Soviet people have been kept in the dark about the Vietnam War. And frankly, very few Americans know the full story either. Although the Soviets had airmen and soldiers over there in Indochina, no one wanted to call it a struggle between the superpowers. But now we can reveal one of the greatest war, a secret that some Russians and Americans have carried around in their heads for decades. You see, Americans of real intelligence value captured in Vietnam were sometimes handed over to the Soviet Union for interrogation by the KGB. Why were the Soviets so interested in these captured American flyers?
That's given. Intelligence given.
The world, an American also breaks his silence. During the Vietnam War, Jerry Mooney's job was electronic eavesdropping for the National Security Agency to reveal Moscow's secret.
The Soviets, as well known throughout the world, will spend millions of dollars for blackmail to receive this type of information. They'll use espionage, they'll use wiretaps, they'll use sexual innuendos, they'll use anything. Here in North Vietnam and Southeast Asia, the men with the of these details and hands-on combat experience simply came floating down as freebies. To deny that they would not take advantage of this when they do all these other things is an analytic crime of gross incompetence. We knew they were going to do it. After the war, 591 American POWs came home. Among them was Airman Colonel Gordon Larson. He was interrogated and tortured by the North Vietnamese.
They'd tie me up, bent over double. They'd pull the rope so tight that it cut off circulation. It cut the tendons in both of my arms, pulled the arm right out of the socket. One time they picked me up and in this ball and set me on a table. And when I wouldn't answer his questions, he just reached out and just pushed me off the table.
But according to Jerry Mooney, after the Vietnamese, some of the captured Americans were handed over to the Soviets.
The solid estimate, and I say solid based on all the peripheral information, is if they broke, they went on.
They went on to Moscow?
They would go on to Moscow.
How many of the captured Americans do you believe were Moscow bound?
We tagged approximately 50 to 75.
We abandoned people over there.
Terry Manassan was another NSA analyst in the Vietnam War period, and he's certain some American POWs were Moscow-bound. How many flights did you monitor that showed Soviets taking Americans to the Soviet Union?
I knew of 8 occasions in a 6-week period where the Vietnamese would fly American prisoners from their special camps into Hanoi, and the people were turned over to the Russians at that time and put on IL-62s and flown out of Hanoi.
How good is your intelligence?
On the money. On the money. You could bet on it. You could sleep on it.
And why would the men in Moscow want to interrogate American pilots? Well, the Soviets supplied a sophisticated SAM missile system to Vietnam, and the Americans had managed to cut those SAMs to ribbons. That air defense system just happened to be the same one that protected the Soviet Union. And KGB men, like General Oleg Kalugin, wanted to know how the Americans did it.
In my time at the intelligence, we did participate in the interrogation of American prisoners of war, but not as chief, interrogators.
General Kalugin claims those interrogations took place in Vietnam, not Moscow. He told us that he knows of 3 Americans who were questioned by the KGB, a high-ranking naval pilot, an Air Force officer, and a CIA agent. And those interrogations continued long after the Vietnam War had ended. It's a sinister place, KGB headquarters. They were willing to show us documents going back as far as the Russian Revolution, but nothing marked Vietnam. This man is in charge of all the KGB files.
General Oleg Kalugin has told us that when he personally was involved as chief of counterintelligence, that he knew of 2 or 3 cases of captured Americans, including a naval flyer, who were interrogated by the KGB in Vietnam. He knows the dates. Wouldn't it be very simple to have a look at those files?
First, we have to look through other files to get this information. At the moment, we have had no result. We will continue, but it will take time.
Inside the KGB headquarters, they are stalling. But outside, KGB agents have been willing to talk in secret.
I had a conversation with a KGB member who told me what the KGB were doing in Vietnam.
Yuri Pankov is an independent Moscow journalist. He was part of our team investigating the KGB role.
Their aim in Vietnam was to find out about American technology. For example, they found out in 1966 about a plane called the RB-47, which was an intelligence gathering plane.
Yuri's KGB sources definitely confirm that interrogations took place in Vietnam and that some of the Americans of special interest were brought to the Soviet Union. It wouldn't be the first time Americans had been held behind bars by the KGB. The U-2 pilot, Gary Powers, spent over 3 months in these cells after being shot down in 1960. Were American POWs ever here? When we asked the new deputy chief of the KGB, Nicholas Stolyarov, he gave an intriguing answer. Can you say whether captive Americans from Vietnam were ever brought here to the Soviet Union?
I don't have any information about that, so I can't answer this question.
but I do not exclude the possibility.
Но я не исключаю этого.
It is possible.
В мире нет ничего невозможного.
Nothing is impossible in this world, and I would like to say again, we are doing everything possible to find out these things.
Сегодня никто с уверенностью сказать не может.
So the new deputy chief of the KGB will not rule out the possibility. The American intelligence analysts we've heard from tell us they confirmed 305 Americans were captured alive but never came home. The Moscow journalist Yuri Pankov has found out the fate of 9 of the POWs after they were interrogated by the KGB. What happened to the men?
The interrogation lasted a day or more. When the interrogators woke up the next day, they found that these 9 American guys had been killed.
How were they killed?
Their throats were cut.
Who killed them?
My KGB source said he didn't know. I said, maybe you tortured them and they died because you tortured them. But he said, no, they didn't. He thought the Vietnamese did it.
Jerry Mooney also gathered intelligence information about the execution of American POWs.
I believe the number was 3 or 4, but we were convinced that they were shot. In other words, we actually saw communications texts from reliable sources, combat watch officers, that they were shot in the head after capture.
What would it have done to the morale of American pilots if they'd found out there were executions?
Well, that was the concern when they blocked me from reporting prior knowledge of executions, that they thought the American pilots, quote, would refuse to fly, indicating that they would be cowards, unquote. I didn't view it that way. We thought the resolution was quite simple. We would take the evidence we've had, go over to the North Vietnamese and say, we know you're doing it, and if it happens again, you can kiss your country goodbye. That's the way we felt about it. But staff people said, no, we have to suppress the information.
The KGB kept meticulous files. If an American was interrogated, his file would certainly end up in here, the reading room of Russia's master spies. General Oleg Kalugin has admitted that some of the Americans interrogated in Vietnam, their stories are here somewhere in these musty old folders. How many? Who knows? Until the Russians let us read the information that we are now this close to. But General Kalugin has said he's willing to go before new hearings in the United States Senate, bringing information from here to tell what he knows about those captured Americans. Both the United States government and the Soviet government have always said there was no interrogation by the Soviets of any captured American flyers.
That is an age-old story. It's older than me and you put together. It's called a wink and a nod diplomacy. You take our people, we wink. We take your people, you nod. It's been going on forever.
Jerry Mooney is also willing to testify before the United States Senate because he believes his country failed to do enough for the POWs.
Now that is a betrayal of not just me and everybody who has served in the Intelligence Commission. It is a betrayal of everybody who has ever served in the military, and it is a betrayal of what this country stands for. And that's why I stepped forward. Nobody's ever done it before.
There are at least 2,300 Americans still missing in action from the Vietnam War. The Russians and Americans we've heard from tonight say that some were definitely taken to the Soviet Union. What they can't say is how many are still alive.
There has been no effort, except denial by our current government, that these men even exist, let alone that there's a prospect that the Russians have them.
Why was there such great secrecy over the handling of these captured Americans?
From our point of view, or for, I mean,
from
why
everyone's
go up
point of view.
For everybody's point of view, because it's political dynamite.